Shooting to the top of the list as Kiwi Ear's most expensive new in-ear monitor is the Astral. That is, of course, if we ignore the punch with its collaboration tax. There is a lot of reasons to like it, despite two small quirks. Let's take a closer look. I want to start with the carry case. Over the past year, I've received a number of Kiwi's in-ear monitors for review, 6 to be exact. The first 3, including the Orchestra Lite, Quintet, and KE4, had the old, rugged synthetic weave cases. More recently, the Eroso and Ether both adopted the newer hard pleather case, which feels like a bit of a downgrade. Now the Astral case uses an even softer pleather, which feels like it'll start flaking off in 2 or 3 years. This is unacceptable on a product costing around €265. Kiwi Ears really needs to go back or find a better alternative. Moving on, the fairly large resin housings have a single vent, they terminate with the standard 2-pin socket, and interface to your human listening components with 6mm metal nozzles. I couldn't get a good fit with the stock tips, which have very hard bores. So after switching to some softer bore tips, everything was fine. Initially, I didn't realize there was a problem because they did fit. I got a base seal, they didn't fall out easily, and there was no discomfort, but the nozzles are actually really long, on par with the Rose Technics QT-X, a more expensive in-ear monitor at €300, and one that I will be comparing the Astral to quite a bit in this review, as well as the Kiwi Ears KE4. So ergonomics might be a problem if your ears simply can't deal with the larger size housings with longer nozzles. I didn't necessarily have a problem with them, but when I wear these, there is very clearly a big gap between almost the entire housing and my ear, which is less than ideal. The faceplate of the Astral is finished with a choice of either gold or blue glitter, not out of the box, you have to pick one when making your purchase. And while I think it's tastefully done, it's a relatively low effort finish that does not raise the bar in design or style at this price point. The cable is an improvement over what we're used to seeing from Kiwi Ears, with the ability to choose between 3.5mm and 4.4mm plugs, and above a certain price point, Kiwi Ears does provide a better, thicker woven cable. While the ability to switch plugs is welcome and something I think many will hope to see across most of their price range in the future, I'm on the fence about the cable, as it's actually quite a bit less flexible than others, especially when I compare it to the silver cable that bundled with the Orchestra Lite, which is easily one of my all-time favorite cables. However, since the reason for it being stiffer is actually because it uses thicker gauge wire, this is easily forgiven. Finally, I want to address the main oddity. The single vent at the top of the shells is the latest and greatest in vent technology. It is huge and completely open. With the right equipment, you can literally probe inside and see the drivers and cables. So while it's probably doing a lot of the tuning work, it has one big drawback. Wind noise has an especially blown bottle-like quality to the sound. You know when someone tries to blow over the mouth of a bottle to produce a tone but fails, and instead you just hear turbulent wind noises? That's kind of what you get, which makes these a bit of a miserable experience to wear on a windy day. On the bright side, almost literally, the tuning of these is really rather excellent. It's yet another variation of the meta tuning with a slight emphasis on both sub-bass and treble, making these a very tastefully, gently U-shaped set of IEMs bordering on the V-shaped. The mini DSP ears exaggerates the treble response of all in-ear monitors, so you can't trust what looks like piercing treble murder death, but I still do think there will be some who think it is a little bright. In the same way the Sennheiser HD800S is bright for some. They're both technically more accurate than their darker counterparts, but not always more enjoyable. The tuning of the Astral is not as thick and warm as the KE4, which focuses more on adhering closer to the meta. So you could say the Astral is a more vibrant, contrasty version of the KE4. Despite KE4's more strict meta tuning, the Astral is also the more technically accurate, and obviously the more detailed of the two. It's not apples to apples, but you could very distantly make the comparison that if the KE4 was like the Sennheiser HD650, the Astral would be like the Sennheiser HD660S. One is smoother and more relaxing, and the other is simply technically superior. Neither are the wrong answer, it just depends on the question. I'm very happy to report that the sub-bass on the Astral has almost all the authority, slam and detail you might expect from something more than twice the price. Only a few sets of IEMs I heard recently at High-End Munich presented bass with the kind of greater slam texture and volume that I personally yearn for, but at around 7 to 8 times the price. The detail doesn't leave you wanting, and the treble, which is shockingly linear and well extended in manual tone sweeps, genuinely gives you a very well balanced, high-end in-ear monitor experience at a fraction of the cost. The Rose Technics QTX shares many similarities with the Astral with its long nozzle, resin housing, and problematic vent in windy weather. It especially shares its excellent bass performance, and distinguishing between the two is almost impossible. The QTX's use of a stronger pinna gain tuning and the inclusion of a treble spike makes them sound more fatiguing, but also more dynamic and detailed, albeit a sort of fake perceived detail that results from the stronger treble response. For that reason, I prefer the Astral over the QTX, although there may be others who prefer a stronger pinna gain tuning, making the QTX still a compelling alternative with an equally problematic noisy vent problem and long nozzle. The Kiwi Ears KE4 shares almost all the usual Kiwi Ears DNA in its shape, size, and vent position, but the vent is covered with a fine mesh, and the nozzle length is closer to the normal average. The bass performances of the two are about on par again, with the Astral edging out in the lead with a slightly more convincing texture and detail, which could also just be a placebo effect from it being a more U-shaped sound with a clearer upper end and a touch less mid-bass, but it's still a contributing factor nonetheless. Compared to the SIMGOT EA1000, the Astral is obviously the easier listen compared to the classic SIMGOT focus on upper mids and treble, which, while sounding endlessly detailed and articulate, can get quickly fatiguing with some tracks. Comparing the Astral with the Orchestra Lite, the sub-bass is quite simply lacking in the Orchestra Lite. If you're happy to just boost the bass and EQ, I hear little reason to upgrade to the Astral given the superior isolation of the Orchestra Lite with its ventless design. For that reason, the Orchestra Lite still remains my favorite. In all my listening with the Astral, I've only ever given them a small sub-bass boost of about 2 decibels, especially in more noisy environments on my work commute, and only my usual treble test tracks proved to be on the edge of piercing, as they should be, with properly tuned headphones and in-ear monitors. On one hand, I can hear they present audio in a way that is very close to my perception of neutral, where it even outclasses my beloved Orchestra Lite. As there isn't any part of the sound I can say anything bad about. It's just fun, clean, vivid, detailed, and gives some much more expensive in-ear monitors a run for their money. It does, however, come at the cost of superlative ergonomics, exhibits below average isolation, and has an underwhelming venting solution. For some people, I think it plays too close to the meta rulebook to be an exceptional IEM, and for others, it will be exactly that strong adherence to the modern status quo that makes these a very safe bet, and a way to get very close to upper mid or in some cases flagship tier IEMs at a fraction of the cost. Despite its quirks, the Astral does stand out as a very well-tuned step up into mid-tier IEM territory that obviously stands above the oversaturated entry-level crowd. That's it for now, take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.